She was given two things on her 18th birthday: a bus ticket out of the foster system and her grandmother's old Bible. What she found inside would change everything. If you believe that the past is never truly gone and that some inheritances are worth more than money, stick with me. This is my story, and if you've ever felt lost, maybe you'll find a piece of yourself in it too. Go ahead and subscribe, because we're going to get through this together. The bus seat vibrated with a low, tooth-buzzing hum that had been my only constant for the last 6 hours. Outside, the world was a watercolor blur of gray sky and skeletal trees. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of disinfectant and damp wool. My whole life had been lived in air like this, recycled, institutional, never quite fresh. I was 18 years old today. The state of Oregon, in its infinite and detached wisdom, had declared me an adult. The declaration came in the form of a manila envelope handed to me by Mrs. Gable, the director of my last group home. Inside was a certified copy of my birth certificate, $100 in cash, a one-way bus ticket to a town called Havenwood, and a thin leaflet titled Resources for Independent Living. The title felt like a joke. The only resource I had was the weight in my lap. It was a King James Bible, its black leather cover worn smooth as a riverstone at the edges. It had belonged to my grandmother, Eleanor. The social worker who dropped it off with my final paperwork said it was the only personal effect listed in my file. She'd said it with a kind of sterile pity, the kind people use when they're talking about a stray dog. "It's not much," she'd said, "but it's yours." It was mine. In a life of borrowed beds and shared dressers, of clothes from donation bins and books stamped with the county library seal, the concept of mine was foreign. I ran my thumb over the gilded letters on the cover. The gold, long since flaked away, leaving only faint impressions in the leather. Holy Bible. I hadn't seen my grandmother since I was 6 years old. My memories of her were fractured, dreamlike images. The scent of cinnamon and soil, the rough texture of her apron, the low hum of her voice as she read to me on a sagging floral sofa. And then, nothing. The official story was that she couldn't handle me. She'd surrendered me to the state, abandoned me. For 12 years, that word had been the cornerstone of my identity. A child abandoned, a problem to be managed. I'd learned to make myself small, to expect nothing, to build walls so high and thick that no one could ever leave me again, because I'd never let them get in. Now, I was being sent back to the place it all began, to a property she had left in my name, a place I hadn't seen since I was a child. The instructions, delivered via a crisp letter from a law firm, were simple. Arrive in Havenwood, contact their office, and settle the estate. Settle. Another word that felt like a punchline. What was there to settle? A dead woman, a forgotten property, and a girl who had been thrown away. The bus slowed, its air brakes hissing like a tired snake. A sign swam into view through the rain-streaked window. Welcome to Havenwood. Population 1,243. The sign was faded, rust bleeding from its bolts. It looked as tired and forgotten as I felt. This wasn't a homecoming. It was the end of the line. I clutched the Bible tighter, the worn leather a strange, cold comfort. It was the only thing I had of her, this book of stories about faith and forgiveness. I wasn't sure I believed in either, but as the bus pulled into the deserted station, I knew one thing for sure. I was about to walk right back into the ghost story of my own life, and I had no idea what I was going to find. The weight of the book felt less like comfort and more like a stone. A piece of the past I was being forced to carry, whether I wanted to or not. The bus doors folded open, and the driver grunted, "Havenwood." I took a deep breath of that stale, recycled air one last time and stepped out into the rain. The lawyer's office was on a street that seemed to have given up sometime around 1985. The signs on the storefronts were sun-bleached, the paint peeling in lazy curls. Henderson and Associates was sandwiched between a dusty antique shop and a laundromat that smelled of hot metal and bleach. The name was grander than the reality. The office was a single room with wood-paneled walls and a ceiling stained by some long-past leak. A woman with a helmet of gray hair looked up from her typewriter, her glasses perched on the end of her nose. She regarded me with the bored disinterest of someone who has seen everything this small town has to offer, twice. "I'm here to see Mr. Henderson," I said, my voice feeling small and thin in the quiet room. "Maya Reyes." Her expression didn't change. "He's expecting you." Mr. Henderson was a man made of tweed and size. He had a kind face, but it was a tired kindness, worn down by years of other people's problems. His desk was an orderly disaster, stacks of files held at bay by a heavy brass paperweight shaped like a ship. He gestured for me to sit in the cracked leather chair opposite him. "Miss Reyes," he began, folding his hands on a file that had my name on it. "Thank you for coming. I was your grandmother's attorney for many years." I just nodded, clutching the strap of my backpack. My grandmother's Bible was inside it, a hard, rectangular presence against my back. "Let's get straight to it," he said, his tone gentle but firm. "Your grandmother, Eleanor, left you her property. The house, the barn, and the 40 acres it sits on." He paused, letting the words sink in. 40 acres. It sounded like a kingdom. "However," he continued, and I knew this was the other shoe dropping, "the estate is complicated. There are significant back taxes owed to the county. 12 years' worth, to be precise." He pushed a sheet of paper across the desk. It was a long column of numbers that ended in a sum that made my stomach clench. It might as well have been $1 million. "The property is scheduled for a tax auction in 30 days, he said. "Which brings us to this." He slid another, thicker document over. "This is an offer from a development group, Cascade Holdings. They've been buying up land on the outskirts of town. They are willing to pay off the tax lien and give you a settlement of $5,000 for the deed." $5,000. It was more money than I had ever seen in my life. It was a new start, a clean break. It was the sensible thing. It was the easy way out. "They see the land as worthless," he added, almost as an afterthought. "The house is derelict. The barn is near collapse. They just want the acreage for future development. It's a generous offer under the circumstances." He was framing it as a rescue, a life raft for the poor orphan girl who'd washed up in his office. Sign the paper, take the money, and disappear. Be the problem that solves itself. And a part of me, the part that had been trained for 12 years to survive by being invisible, screamed to take it. Run. Don't look back. But another part of me, a smaller, quieter part I barely recognized, felt a stubborn spark of something else. Anger? Pride? I didn't know. I looked down at my hands, then back at him. "I want to see it first," I said. Mr. Henderson sighed again, a long, weary exhalation. "Maya, there's nothing to see. It's not the place you remember. It's just rot and ruin." "I want to see it," I repeated, my voice stronger this time. He studied my face for a long moment, his gaze searching for something. Maybe he saw a flicker of Eleanor in my eyes. Maybe he just saw a stubborn kid he couldn't dissuade. "All right," he finally conceded, leaning back in his chair. "I'll drive you out. But the offer from Cascade is only on the table for 48 hours. They want to move quickly before the public auction, so you have until Friday to decide." He stood up and grabbed a set of keys from a hook on the wall. "Don't get your hopes up, kid. Some ghosts are better left undisturbed." The drive out to the property was a journey back in time. We left the small grid of Havenwood's main streets and turned onto a county road that quickly dissolved from cracked asphalt to gravel. The trees pressed in on either side, their branches heavy with moss, forming a dark, dripping canopy over the road. The lawyer's sedan bumped and rattled, the suspension groaning in protest. Mr. Henderson drove in silence, his expression unreadable. I watched the landscape unfold, a wild, untamed green that felt both beautiful and vaguely threatening. It was the kind of place where things got lost, people, memories. After another 10 minutes, he slowed the car and turned onto an even smaller track, barely more than 2 ruts in the earth, so overgrown that branches scraped and screeched along the sides of the car. And then we were there. The track opened into a clearing, and I saw it. The house. Mr. Henderson had said it was a ruin, and he hadn't been lying. It was a 2-story farmhouse that had once been white, but was now a patchwork of gray, weathered wood, and peeling paint. The porch sagged in the middle like a tired old man's shoulders. Windows were boarded up or broken, dark, vacant eyes staring out at us. To its right stood the barn, a massive structure whose roof had a severe dip in the center, as if a giant had taken a bite out of it. The whole place was being swallowed by nature. Blackberry brambles clawed at the foundation, and tall grass, brown and withered from the winter, choked what used to be a yard. It looked exactly like what it was, a place abandoned, a place without love. Mr. Henderson killed the engine, and the sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the steady drumming of rain on the car roof. "See?" he said, his voice soft. "I told you." He wasn't being cruel. He was being practical. He was seeing a liability, a pile of rotting wood and unpaid bills. But I was seeing something else. Through the grime and the decay, I could just make out the ghost of a memory. A little girl swinging on a tire swing that used to hang from the huge oak tree by the barn. Me. "I have to be back in court this afternoon," he said, pulling a large, old-fashioned iron key from his pocket. He handed it to me. It felt heavy and cold in my palm. "The lock on the front door still works, surprisingly. I'll be back Friday morning at 10. If you've signed the papers, we can file them immediately. If not..." He let the sentence hang in the air. "There's no power, no running water. Are you sure you want to stay here?" I looked from the decaying house to his concerned face. Every rational part of my brain was telling me to get back in the car, go sign the papers, and take the $5,000. But I couldn't. It felt like a betrayal, though I didn't know of what or of whom. "I'm sure," I said. He nodded slowly, a flicker of something, disappointment, respect, in his eyes. "All right. There's a general store about 3 miles back down the road if you need anything. Lock the door at night." He started the car, and without another word, he reversed down the overgrown track, the red of his taillights quickly swallowed by the gloom. I was alone. Truly, utterly alone, in the middle of nowhere, with a ghost house and a deadline. I stood there in the rain for a long time, the iron key growing warm in my hand. The house didn't look menacing anymore. It just looked sad. Taking a deep, steadying breath, I walked up the creaking porch steps and fitted the key into the lock. The mechanism turned with a rusty groan, and the heavy wooden door swung inward, opening into darkness and the scent of dust, damp earth, and time itself. I stepped across the threshold, out of the rain and into the past. The air inside was thick and still, carrying the scent of 100 forgotten seasons. Dust motes danced like tiny fairies in the weak gray light filtering through a grimy window on the landing. The entire contents of the house seemed to be held in a state of suspended animation, blanketed in a uniform layer of pale dust. A long sofa, its floral pattern faded to a ghostly whisper, sat against one wall. A stone fireplace, cold and cavernous, dominated the other. In the corner, a grandfather clock stood silent, its hands frozen at 3:30. I ran my fingers along a dusty mantelpiece, leaving a clean streak in the grime. My touch felt like a violation, an intrusion on a long and private sleep. I moved slowly from the living room to the kitchen. Here the decay was more pronounced. A calendar on the wall was turned to August, 12 years ago. A single mug sat by the sink. I could almost see her, my grandmother, standing right there, her back to me, washing this very mug. The memory was so faint it was more of an echo, a feeling. I felt a pang in my chest, a hollow ache of loss for a woman I had been taught to resent. Why did you leave me? The question hung in the silent air. I explored the rest of the downstairs, my boots echoing on the wooden floors. Every room was a time capsule of a life abruptly stopped. Upstairs, there were 2 bedrooms. One was small and plain, clearly a guest room. The other was hers. A large, iron-framed bed sat against the far wall, stripped of its linens. A heavy wooden wardrobe stood beside it, its door slightly ajar. But it was the small nightstand by the bed that drew my attention. It was the only surface in the room that wasn't completely covered in dust. It had been wiped clean, relatively recently. And sitting in the very center of it was my own copy of her Bible, the one the social worker had given me. Except it wasn't. I froze. I touched the backpack on my shoulders. I could feel the hard, rectangular shape of the Bible inside it. This was a second one, identical. Worn in the same places, the leather soft and supple. Why would she have 2? I picked it up. It felt different from mine, lighter. I opened it, and a piece of paper, folded into a small, tight square, fell out from between the pages of the book of Jeremiah. My heart started to pound, a frantic, trapped bird in my chest. With trembling fingers, I unfolded it. It wasn't a letter. It was a map. Hand-drawn in black ink on a piece of yellowed stationery. It was a simple, almost childish drawing of the property. The house, the barn, the creek that ran along the back edge of the land. And behind the barn, next to a detailed sketch of the massive old oak tree, was a small, definitive X. My breath caught in my throat. This was insane. It was something out of a storybook. People didn't just find treasure maps in old Bibles. But this felt real. The paper was real. The ink was real. A cold draft snaked its way through a broken window pane, making me shiver. For 12 years, I had believed a simple story. I was abandoned. My grandmother didn't want me. But this felt like something else. This felt like a message, a secret left behind. I looked out the dirty window towards the barn and the ancient, gnarled oak that stood sentinel behind it. The light was already starting to fade, the gray afternoon deepening into a bruised purple evening. Whatever was buried out there, it had waited 12 years. I wasn't going to let it wait another night. I put the map in my pocket, grabbed the Bible from the nightstand, and headed back downstairs, a new and unfamiliar feeling pulsing through me. It wasn't hope, not yet. It was something sharper, more urgent. It was purpose. Finding a shovel was the first challenge. The barn was a shadowy cathedral of decay, smelling of hay and rust and animal ghosts. The weak beam of the cheap flashlight I'd bought at the general store cut a nervous path through the gloom. Rusted tools and pieces of forgotten machinery lay scattered about like the bones of prehistoric creatures. Finally, leaning against a stack of rotting feed sacks, I found it. A spade, its wooden handle gray and splintered, its metal head caked with dried mud but still solid. I carried it out behind the barn, towards the ancient oak tree. The map had been clear. 10 paces north from the lightning scar on its trunk. I found the scar easily. A jagged, silver wound, running from a high branch all the way down to the roots. The tree was immense, a silent giant that had witnessed generations come and go. I paced out the 10 steps, my boots sinking into the soft, damp earth. I marked the spot with a rock. Then I began to dig. The work was brutal. The ground was cold and dense, laced with a web of thick roots that fought back against the shovel. The blades scraped against hidden stones, sending jarring vibrations up the handle and into my arms. Rain began to fall again, a cold, persistent drizzle that plastered my hair to my face and soaked through my jacket. My muscles, unaccustomed to this kind of labor, quickly began to scream in protest. My back ached. My hands, soft from a life lived indoors, were rubbed raw. Doubt began to creep in. This was a fool's errand. I was a city kid, a ward of the state, digging a hole in the middle of nowhere based on a drawing I'd found in a book. I was chasing a fantasy because the reality, that I was alone and had nothing, was too hard to face. I was about to give up, to throw the shovel down in disgust and retreat to the cold misery of the house, when it happened. The shovel hit something that wasn't a rock or a root. It made a dull, metallic thud, a sound of purpose. A jolt of adrenaline shot through me, overriding the pain and fatigue. I dropped to my knees and started digging with my bare hands, clawing at the wet soil. My fingers brushed against a hard, cold surface. Metal. I worked frantically, scooping away the mud until I had uncovered the top of a box. It was an old military-style footlocker, painted olive green, its surface pitted with rust. It was larger than I expected, maybe 3 feet long and 2 feet wide. And it was heavy. It took all my strength to work the shovel underneath it and pry it from the sucking grip of the earth. Finally, with a great heave and a groan, I broke it free. I dragged it across the muddy ground, back towards the faint, welcoming light of the farmhouse. Getting it up the porch steps and through the front door was an ordeal. I was panting, covered in mud, and trembling with a mixture of exhaustion and manic excitement. I left a trail of dirt and water across the wooden floor as I hauled it into the living room. There, in the dusty twilight, I knelt before it. It was secured with 2 latches and a thick, rusty padlock. Of course. For a moment, despair washed over me. I had no key, no bolt cutters. Then my eyes fell on the fireplace poker, resting on its stand by the cold hearth. It was long and heavy, made of solid iron. It would have to do. I wedged the tip of the poker into the padlock's shackle and began to pry, putting all my weight into it. The metal groaned. I strained, my muscles screaming, my teeth gritted. The old, rusted metal fought back, but it was a losing battle. With a final, sharp crack, the shackle snapped. The sound echoed through the silent house like a gunshot. I paused, my heart hammering against my ribs, listening. There was only the sound of the rain and my own ragged breathing. I took a deep breath, unfastened the 2 latches, and lifted the heavy lid. A musty smell of paper and dry air rose to meet me. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing the contents. There was no gold, no jewels. My first sight was a stack of letters, hundreds of them, tied neatly with faded red twine. Beside them sat a smaller, sealed tin box, the kind people use to keep biscuits in. And underneath that, nestled on a bed of yellowed cheesecloth, was a single, ornate, heavy brass key. I reached in and lifted the bundle of letters. The top one was an envelope addressed in a familiar, loopy cursive I recognized from the one birthday card I'd ever received from her. It was addressed simply to Maya. I sat on the dusty floor, the footlocker open before me like a tomb, and untied the twine from the first stack of letters. The flashlight beam trembled in my hand. My entire world, the whole rickety structure of my identity, built on the foundation of being unwanted, was about to be torn down or cemented forever. The first letter was dated just a week after I was taken into state custody. My hands shook as I unfolded the brittle paper. "My dearest Maya," it began. The ink was slightly faded, the handwriting elegant but strained. "If you are reading this, it means I am gone, and that I have failed in the most important thing I ever tried to do, to get back to you. I need you to know the truth. I need you to know that not a single day has passed when my heart has not broken for you. I did not give you away, I sent you away. There is a difference, a terrible, necessary difference." I had to stop reading. A sob, thick and painful, tore its way out of my chest. I pressed my fist to my mouth, trying to stifle the sound. I read on, my vision blurring with tears. The letters, written over 12 years and stored here in the dark, told a story I could barely comprehend. It wasn't a story of abandonment. It was a story of protection. My father, her son, had fallen into a world of debt and dangerous men. He'd used my name, my future, as collateral. When he disappeared, the debt fell to her. They came to the farm. They threatened her. They threatened me. They watched the house, Maya, she wrote in one letter. They knew your school bus schedule. They described the little blue coat you loved so much. I knew I could never keep you safe here with me. They would have used you to control me, to take everything. So I did the only thing I could think of. I made you disappear from them. She had orchestrated the whole thing. She called Child Protective Services on herself, claiming she was an unfit guardian. She put on the performance of a lifetime, acting cold and distant, refusing to see me. She made the state believe she was a monster so they would take me away, hide me in the anonymous safety of the system where those men could never find me. It was an act of brutal, self-destructive love. She sold off her jewelry, her savings, everything of value that wasn't the land itself, to pay them off in small, untraceable increments over the years. She intentionally let the farm fall into ruin, let the taxes pile up, to make the property seem worthless, a liability no one would want. It was a scorched earth defense to protect me. Every dollar I gave them was a piece of my soul, she wrote, but it was a price I paid gladly to know you were breathing, sleeping, growing somewhere safe. They thought I was a broken old woman living in squalor. I let them think it. I lived in fear every day, but it was a fear I chose. I read for hours, letter after letter, a chronicle of a secret war fought by a woman I had never truly known. She wrote about her loneliness, her guilt, her desperate hope that one day she could fix it all and bring me home. She wrote about watching me from a distance once at a park, her heart feeling like it would burst just seeing me on the swings. She knew she could never approach me, for fear of leading them right to me. The last letter was different. The handwriting was shaky, weak. "I'm running out of time, my love. The sickness is in my bones now. I won't live to see your 18th birthday, the day you are finally free. But I have left you what I can. A chance. This house is your fortress, Maya. The land is your legacy. Don't let them take it. Don't let them win. Everything I did so you could one day stand on this ground and be free." I sat there in the cold, dark house, the letters spread around me, and I wept. I wept for the little girl who believed she was unlovable. I wept for the grandmother who had sacrificed everything, who had lived a life of fear and poverty to buy my safety. I wept for the 12 years we had lost, a chasm of misunderstanding and pain that could never be crossed. The anger and resentment I had carried for so long dissolved, replaced by a grief so profound it felt like it would split me in two. She hadn't abandoned me, she had saved me. The grief was a physical thing, a crushing weight that left me hollowed out and raw. I spent the rest of the night huddled in a dusty armchair, wrapped in an old quilt I found in a chest, the letters piled in my lap. The story they told replayed in my mind, each detail a fresh wound. The lie I had lived with was gone, and the truth was almost too painful to bear. She had loved me. She had loved me so much she had torn her own life apart to protect mine. By morning, the rain had stopped. A pale, watery sunlight filtered through the grime on the windows, illuminating the dust-filled air. The house was still and silent, but it felt different now. It wasn't a tomb of bad memories anymore. It was a sanctuary, a monument to a love I had never understood. The exhaustion was deep in my bones, but beneath it, a new feeling was taking root. A slow-burning anger, not at my grandmother, but at the forces that had cornered her. The faceless men who had threatened a child. The development company, Cascade Holdings, who saw this land not as a home or a legacy, but as a line item on a balance sheet. They were vultures, circling what they thought was a carcass. They didn't know the story buried in the soil. They didn't know the price that had been paid for every single acre. And then I thought of Mr. Henderson, with his kind, tired eyes, urging me to take the easy way out. He was part of the same system, the one that saw me as a problem to be neatly filed away. Sign the paper, take the pittance, and disappear. It was the sensible thing to do. But my grandmother hadn't done the sensible thing. She had done the hard thing, the impossible thing. She had fought. Now it was my turn. Listen, if you've ever felt completely alone, or if you've ever had the story you tell yourself about your life turned completely upside down, I need you to hear this. The moment you discover the truth is terrifying. It feels like the ground beneath your feet is gone. But it's also the moment you get to choose what you build next. If this story is hitting a nerve, if you've had a moment like that, I want you to know you aren't crazy and you aren't alone. Let me know in the comments if you've ever had to find the truth buried in your own past. This community, this space, it's for people who get it. You are seen here. Now, back to that cold morning in the house. There was still the matter of the smaller tin box and the brass key. My hands were steadier now as I picked up the biscuit tin. It was sealed with a thick band of wax. I used the fireplace poker to chip it away and pry it open the lid. Inside, nestled in more of the yellowed cheesecloth, were neat stacks of cash. $100 bills, bound in paper bands. I counted it slowly, my heart thudding a steady, determined rhythm. It came to exactly $22,500. A small note, in her familiar script, was tucked into the last bundle. This is all I could save. It should be enough for the wolves at the county office. Pay the tax bill. Make the land yours again. Then, when you are safe, find the real inheritance. This money is just a tool. What your grandfather left you is your future. All my love, Eleanor. The wolves at the county office, the tax bill. I remembered the figure on the paper Mr. Henderson had shown me. It had been just over $21,000. She had known. She had planned for this exact amount, saving for years, dollar by painful dollar, to give me this weapon. This was the first part of the plan. Secure the fortress. I looked at the heavy brass key, still sitting in the footlocker. The real inheritance, my future. The weight of her sacrifice, her planning, her incredible foresight, settled on me not as a burden, but as a mantle. I wasn't just a survivor of the system anymore. I was Eleanor's granddaughter, and I had a fight to win. I gathered the letters, placing them carefully back in the footlocker. I took the money and the key, tucked them securely into my backpack, and waited. The clock was ticking down to 10 a.m. The moment Mr. Henderson would return, the moment my new life would begin. The sound of his car crunching up the gravel track arrived at precisely 10 o'clock. I was waiting on the porch, sitting on the top step, the manila envelope with the Cascade Holdings offer resting beside me. I had the papers, but I hadn't signed them. When Mr. Henderson got out of his car, he looked tired, but his expression softened slightly when he saw me. He probably thought I was a sad, pathetic sight. A kid who'd spent 2 nights in a derelict house and was now ready to surrender to reality. "Morning, Maya," he said, climbing the steps. "Did you have a chance to look over the documents?" "I did," I said, my voice even. I picked up the envelope. He reached for it, a look of gentle relief on his face. "Good. It's for the best. We can go right to my office. I'll notarize your signature and we can wire the settlement. I pulled the envelope back. I'm not signing it, I said. He stopped, his hand hovering in the air between us. He blinked. I'm sorry? I'm not selling the property. I'm going to pay the back taxes. A series of emotions flickered across his face. Confusion, disbelief, and then a deep, weary frustration. He sighed, the sound he'd made in his office, but this time it was edged with impatience. Maya, we've been over this. You can't afford the taxes. This is a wonderful, generous offer that will give you a fresh start. Don't let sentimentality cloud your judgment. This place, he gestured to the decaying house, is a money pit. It's an anchor that will drag you down. I have the money, I said simply. He stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. What? How? That's not your concern, I replied, my voice harder than I intended. I saw a flash of hurt in his eyes, and I softened my tone. My fight wasn't with him. He was just a cog in the machine. My grandmother made provisions. I can cover the full amount. He looked from my face to the house and back again, as if trying to solve a puzzle that made no sense. He was a man who dealt in facts, in numbers, in legal precedents. He didn't have a category for secret lockboxes and sacrificial love. Even if you pay the taxes, he argued, shifting tactics, what then? You'll have this ruin and no money to fix it. No way to support yourself. Cascade Holdings won't just go away. They'll wait. They'll find other ways to pressure you. They want this land. Then let them try, I said. The words came out with a certainty that surprised even me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't running. I was standing my ground. On my ground. He was silent for a long time, studying me. The tired lawyer fell away, and for a moment, I saw the man who had been my grandmother's friend. He saw the stubborn set of my jaw, the fire in my eyes. He saw Eleanor. Finally, he gave a slow, reluctant nod. The county tax office closes at 4, he said, his voice all business again. If you're serious, you'll need a cashier's check. My bank is on the way. The ride back to town was silent, but it was a different kind of silence. It wasn't awkward anymore. It was heavy with unspoken things. At the bank, he waited while I converted the stacks of old $100 bills into a single, crisp cashier's check for $21,742.16. At the county office, a bored-looking clerk barely glanced at me as I slid the check under the glass. She stamped the paperwork with a loud, final thud, and just like that, it was done. The debt was cleared. The land was mine. As we walked out into the pale afternoon sun, Mr. Henderson stopped me on the courthouse steps. Your grandmother was the most stubborn woman I ever met, he said, a faint smile on his lips. She would be proud of you today. He paused. If you need anything, Maya, anything at all, my door is open. It was the first time he had sounded like more than a lawyer. He sounded like an ally. I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. Thank you. I had won the first battle, but as he drove away, I knew the war was just beginning. I was now the owner of a ruined farm, with a few $100s to my name, and a powerful company that wanted me gone. But I also had a key in my pocket, and the promise of a real inheritance. Returning to the farm that afternoon felt completely different. Before, I had been a visitor, a ghost haunting another ghost's house. Now, I was the owner. Every creaking floorboard, every peeling strip of wallpaper, every pane of broken glass was mine. It was a daunting, terrifying, and exhilarating feeling. I walked through the rooms not as an explorer, but as a steward. This is where she slept. This is where she cooked. This is where she waited. The weight of responsibility settled on my shoulders. I couldn't let her sacrifice be for nothing. I had to make this place live again. I spent the rest of the day cleaning. It was a small, almost futile gesture against 12 years of neglect, but I had to do something. I swept away the thickest layers of dust, washed the grime from a single window in the kitchen until sunlight streamed through, clear and bright. With every swipe of the rag, I felt like I was erasing the sadness, letting the light back in. As evening fell, I took out the brass key. It was heavy and ornate, clearly not for a simple door. I thought of the final line in her note. What your grandfather left you is your future. And then I remembered something else. From one of the earlier letters, a passing mention I had skimmed over in my grief-stricken haze. Your grandfather, Samuel, could make wood sing. He built this house with his own hands, and his heart is still in the barn. His heart is still in the barn. I grabbed my flashlight and headed out, the key clutched in my hand. The barn was just as dark and imposing as before, but my fear was gone, replaced by a sense of pilgrimage. I swept the flashlight beam across the vast, cluttered space. My grandfather. I had no memories of him. He had died long before I was born. My grandmother had only written of him with a deep, quiet reverence. He was a craftsman, a builder. Where would a man like that hide his heart? I started with the obvious places: tool chests, cabinets, a small office tucked away in a corner. I found nothing. The locks were all simple, modern padlocks, or were broken entirely. The brass key fit none of them. I felt a pang of frustration. I walked to the center of the barn, right under the sagging point in the roof, and shone the light on the floor. It was made of thick, wide wooden planks, worn smooth by decades of use. I started walking slowly, systematically, examining every inch. It was near the large sliding doors that I found it. A single floorboard was a slightly different color, a richer, darker wood than the ones around it. And on its surface, so faint it was almost invisible, was a small, carved symbol. A dove. I knelt down, my heart beginning to race. I ran my fingers over the carving and felt a slight depression. It was a keyhole, cleverly disguised within the dove's wing. With a trembling hand, I inserted the brass key. It slid in perfectly. I turned it. There was a soft, satisfying click of a well-made mechanism. The floorboard didn't pop up. I pushed on it, pulled at it. Nothing. Then I remembered he was a craftsman, a man of clever designs. I looked closer at the board. There were no visible hinges. I pushed the board sideways, and it slid smoothly and silently into a hidden recess under the adjacent plank, revealing a dark, square opening. A hidden compartment. I aimed my flashlight into the hole. The beam fell upon a large, beautifully constructed wooden chest, its surface inlaid with that same dove motif. It wasn't locked. I reached in, my hands brushing against the cool, smooth wood, and I lifted the lid. The scent that rose from the chest was incredible, not of dust and decay, but of cedar, oil, and old paper. Inside, it was a treasure beyond my wildest dreams, but not of gold. It was a complete set of antique woodworking tools: hand planes with brass fittings, chisels with rosewood handles, saws with intricate etching on their blades. They were immaculate, wrapped in oilcloth, clearly cherished and cared for. Beneath the tools were leather-bound journals. I opened one. The pages were filled with elegant, precise handwriting and detailed architectural drawings. Plans for furniture, for cabinets, for complex joinery. It was my grandfather's life's work. And under the journals was the final piece, a thick, legal-looking portfolio tied with a ribbon. I opened it. It contained surveys, land deeds, and contracts. My eyes scanned the documents and my breath caught. They were the original deeds to the timber rights for the entire 40 acres of old-growth forests surrounding the farm. According to the contracts, my grandmother had leased the land itself to a timber company decades ago, but she had structured the deal to retain personal ownership of the trees themselves. The lease had expired 5 years ago. Cascade Holdings had bought the worthless land lease, assuming the timber rights came with it. They didn't. They owned the dirt. I owned the forest. This was the real inheritance. Not money, but knowledge, a craft, and the means to be self-sufficient. This was a future, a way to not just survive, but to build. I sat there in the dark barn, the smell of cedar filling the air, and I finally understood my grandmother's plan. She hadn't just given me a fortress. She had given me the tools and the materials to rebuild my life from the ground up. The following months were a blur of hard work and discovery. The first thing I did was call Mr. Henderson. I told him about the timber rights. There was a long, stunned silence on the other end of the line, followed by a low whistle. "Eleanor," he murmured. "That brilliant, stubborn woman." He handled the legal side, sending a curt, non-negotiable letter to Cascade Holdings, informing them that any attempt to survey or harvest the timber on my property would be met with swift and severe legal action. Their response was silence. The vulture had flown away, realizing the meal it thought was dead had teeth. With Mr. Henderson's help, I found a sustainable logging company from the other side of the state. They were a small, family-run operation that specialized in selective harvesting, taking only mature trees to ensure the health of the forest. The owner, a man named Ben, with hands as gnarled as an oak root, came to walk the property with me. When he saw my grandfather's journals, his eyes lit up. He treated them like sacred texts. "Your grandfather was an artist," he said, his voice full of reverence. "The contract I signed with them gave me a steady, respectable income, more than enough to live on, pay the future taxes, and, most importantly, begin restoring the farm." Ben introduced me to a local carpenter, an old man named Gus who had known my grandfather. He'd been his apprentice as a boy. When Gus saw the tools, he took off his hat and held it over his heart. "Haven't seen these in 60 years, he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Samuel taught me everything I know with these very chisels." Gus started coming by 3 days a week. He didn't want payment in money. He wanted to teach me. We started with the barn, reinforcing the beams, replacing the rotted sections of the roof, just as my grandfather's journals instructed. Gus taught me how to read the wood, how to use the planes, how to cut a perfect dovetail joint. Under his guidance, my hands, once soft and useless, grew calloused and capable. I was learning my grandfather's language. I was making the wood sing. Slowly, painstakingly, the farm began to breathe again. The house got a new roof, new windows. I stripped the old, peeling wallpaper and found beautiful beadboard walls underneath. I sanded the floors, and the rich grain of the old wood came to life. I wasn't just fixing a house. I was healing it. And with every nail I hammered, every board I sawed, I felt like I was healing myself, too. The emptiness inside me was being filled, not with noise or distraction, but with the quiet satisfaction of creation. I was building a home, my home. It wasn't just a place, it was a story, a legacy of love, sacrifice, and resilience that flowed from my grandparents, through the soil and the trees, and into my own 2 hands. My grandmother had given me more than a second chance. She had shown me who I was. I was not Maya Reyes, the abandoned girl, the ward of the state. I was the granddaughter of Eleanor and Samuel Reyes. I was a builder. I was a protector of a forest. I was home, and my story, the real one, was just beginning. My grandmother taught me that the most valuable things are never the easiest to find. They're buried under years of pain, misunderstanding, and neglect. They're hidden in the earth, in the floorboards, in the stories we're too afraid to read. But if you're brave enough to pick up the shovel, if you're stubborn enough to keep digging, you might find something that will not only change your life, but will show you the person you were always meant to be. This place, this home, it's my inheritance. But the real gift was the truth, the knowledge that I was never abandoned. I was protected, I was loved. And that's a truth worth fighting for. What's buried in your story? What truth have you been waiting to uncover? If you feel comfortable, share a piece of it in the comments below. Let's build a community of people who aren't afraid to dig, who know that our past doesn't have to define our future. Your story matters. And if you want to be a part of this one and see what we build next, make sure you subscribe and join us on the journey. Because trust me, this is just the beginning.